And yeah, great. So continue being recorded. It's there. Thank you very much. Normally, when you have also discussions with the students, then you don't need to record. Then they are also more free. And the idea is that we have recorded the lecture and they can assess later on. This is really great. Thanks again, Luca. Huge thanks.
No problem. Thank you. Okay, I think you can see my screen now. Let me know otherwise. So today we going to tackle this issue of governance in environmental research. Gonna give you some idea about what theories can be used and what methods um, can be applied. Also giving you like a first-hand like try on one specific method that we will address together, and there would be also a small exercise for you that you could do it independently in this class during the break, but I will let you know later on. So first of all, this is the index. We're gonna see what governance is, what do we understand with governance, even though I'm sure you already like heard this topic maybe during this class a lot. So maybe just to narrow it down a little bit and clarify some issues, please feel free to raise your hand or just join in the conversation if you have questions. I don't mind to be interrupted at all. Then the methodological approaches, and then group activity, and then the final, we're closing up with some feedback and remarks. Then first of all, what is governance? I have taken well, the liberty more or less to introduce this topic of governance. As you know, as you can imagine, is a very complex concept, and is analysis also the addressing and how to investigate governance has becoming quite popular in the last 2 decades. I would say it is started as a product of academic debate on the transformation of the state, as well as also other perspective of like nations, for example, or the political economic regimes, and also good governance. There are many characterizations of governance. I would just tell you, just to narrow it down a little bit, that its manifestation, or how governance manifests, reflects a lot of changes and also challenges about the empirical reality and how organizational networks function and work, basically. I've taken four definitions of governance. I think some of which are already in your maybe reference list, but I'm gonna also give you another reference list at some useful literature later on. The first one says that it refers to a process of interaction and decision-making among the actors involved in collective problems. So we have a collective problems that I have highlighted here that leads to the creation, reinforcement, and reproduction of social norms and institutions as well. The second definition refers to the idea of the ways in which activities of governing are now distributed over a much wider group of actors. Before, it was only like, let's say, governments and governance officials that were dealing with these issues. But then this idea has been like sort of like dividing apart a little bit. So nowadays, it implies a process of coordinating and consolidating multiple actors. Then is also another definition from Dewitt and Gallas. This is also interesting, that refers to a system of checks and balances and established norms regarding ranging from formal institutions to informal processes. This is very much important, especially on local terms and local communities and local environments, rural contexts, where informal processes are very relevant. So this to sort of govern interactions between major entities throughout the expectations and performance of individuals. So in this sentence, or these words that I have highlighted, it just refers to idea of inclusiveness of the community. The last one refers to a more recent trend of governance, that is global environmental governance, which I believe you'll find this definition on this chapter that you've been given for today's class. It's from Lemos and Agraval. very prominent scholars on governance and also community-based natural resource governance. So this has to do not only the action of governance themselves, but also the action of community, business, non-governmental NGO. So it's kind of broaden up the spectrum of governance, and basically is this set of regulatory processes, mechanism, and organization throughout which political actors influence environmental actions and outcomes. This is pretty much relevant if you remember what I just said at the beginning, introducing this idea of how organizational networks works, organizations in general can work. Moving on, the idea of good governance then. So we got governance. What is good governance? So there is this interesting, easy reading graph that I've taken from a research institute in Switzerland that sort of resumes some criteria of good governance. And there are a lot of papers about that and a lot of literature as well. So first of all, good governance ought to be like participatory, equitable and inclusive, efficient, effective and efficient, accountable, transparent, following like the rule of law, and also consensus orientated and responsive. These are all elements and criteria that are very important to sort of achieve good governance. And why is that important? Some literatures refers to the idea of the good governance as a contributor to violence and to preventing and resolving conflict. In environmental governance, we're talking about socio-ecological conflicts. It guarantees also the realization of human rights in a manner that is essentially free of abuse and corruptions. There are a lot of big institutions that tackles this issue of good governance and associated it with human rights. For example, the United Nations. It fosters collective actions. From a social perspective, this is very much important as a way to empower local communities and collective actions. It measures why and how public institutions conduct public affairs and manage public and natural resources. This is also an important issue when tackling, for example, environmental governance issues like protected areas, etc. It nurtures democratic and sustainable development. There's a tight link between the idea of good governance and democracy in general. For instance, this term is pretty much used both in developing context, but also in developed context and countries, for example, in Europe at policy level, for example. I've taken now on theoretical approaches 3 strands of theories which I would like to show it to you and suggest to you when tackling the idea of governance and environmental governance in general and when doing research. The theories will help you to sort of sustain your ideas and also guide your research questions when you're doing your work on environmental governance research. The general and very broad theory of political ecology is, as you probably know, is this theories are theories that sort of try to investigate the relations between human and natures. So that's the essence of it. There are many definitions of political ecology I've just taken from Bryans and Bailey that are major scholars on political or major political ecologists. 3 main assumptions that are pretty much everybody's or every political ecologist agree upon. First of all is that environmental changes do not affect society homogeneously. So political, social, and economic differences can and very often determine the uneven distribution of cost and benefits. Then the second is that any environmental change must affect the political and economic status quo, which means very much often what is referred as the politicization of the environment, the politicization of nature, for example. And the third assumption says that the inequitable distribution of costs and benefits, along with its impact on pre-existing inequalities, have political implication in terms of altering power relations deriving from them. So it's this way sort of introduce a huge strand of like hierarchical issues and power relations that are very much present in the study and in the research of environmental governance. Another strand is development theories. The many development theories you might think about neoliberalism, globalization, etc. And they try to tackle the idea about changes and challenges in society, how society deals with development, basically. For instance, I just give you an example in a context of neoliberalism and globalizations. In the past 2 to 3 decades, we've been analyzing, or researchers have been studying this concept of neo-extractivism, for example. That is when the neo-extractive frontiers expand rapidly. This basically means every time you have some intervention, especially in developing countries, where natural resources are extracted in order to provide for the global market, for the world market. For example, commodities. Think about, I don't know, soy, cattle, palm oil, etc. This generates a lot of pressures on a natural ecosystem, but not only, also on local communities, marginalized communities. Think about indigenous communities, also their identities and their cultures as well. So you can take, I have often like research neo-extractivisms in South America, for example. Third one, it's perception and representation theories. Dr. Bonatti works a lot with that, and it's trying to better understand human realities. This is very much sustained by participatory approaches, very much, and then trying to understand and see the reaction to risks and problems from the community's perspective. That depends on different characteristics and also different relations. Think about cultural, historical, religious, political, you name it. So it's very varied, but nevertheless, it's super important. So if you take these three strands of theories, they might help you in the research of environmental governance, at least to sustain all this, the work that you might be doing in this field. Are there any questions so far? See if I can see your hand somewhere. If you're having any, let me know.
I have a question, actually.
Yes.
It's about the second point from political ecology, the thing where it's like any environmental change must affect political and economic status quo.
Yeah.
Do they tend to say that some things are not environmental changes when they don't affect this, or do they basically frame it as like, if there's an environmental change, then there must be some way to find a political and economic status quo? Do you understand my question?
Okay, thank you for your question. The literature on political ecology is very broad and sometimes is also contradictory somehow. I would say that in this specific case, or to answer your questions, I would say yes, it could be actually mutual, like depending on environmental changes, affect political and economic status quos, but somehow also environmental status quo affect political economic changes somehow.
Yeah.
It's mutual. Does it
Okay.
answer your question?
Yeah, a little bit. I was just more thinking of, because like, you know, sometimes there are problems that happen out there which don't have any like direct implications for the status quo, you know? And would they then just deem it not a change, or would they like actually go out as far as saying like, okay, this minor thing happened like on my farm, there must be a way I can like attach it to like some political issue or economic issue, you know?
Yeah, I think it varies a lot on what implication. What we are like trying to present here is mostly is a general assumption of what, you know, a general brand of political ecologists would agree, but I'm sure it might be a situation where exactly what you say could occur, you know.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Okay.
Yeah, so you are right. Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem. Okay, so if there are no further questions, I would just jump into frameworks. So those are like frameworks, you know, when you think about frameworks, it's sometimes it's a mix with methods, theories, and approaches that sometimes is hard to tackle. What I'm suggesting here with those 5 frameworks are basically instruments that you could use to address environmental governance research. First of all, you might be familiar with common pool resources from Elinor Ostrom, for example. That is those frame or different frameworks that investigate natural resource system, for example, irrigation system or fishing grounds, whose size or characteristics makes it very costly, but not impossible to exclude potential beneficiaries from obtaining benefits from its use. Behind that, there is also very much the assumption that local communities, or those who are primarily affected or directly affected by the access, use, and management of resource systems, are the one that can manage it more sustainably. So that is the common assumption behind the CPR framework. The second one that I would suggest is the new institutional economics that seeks to account for the emergence and persistence of institutions on the basis of their efficiency. So we're tackling institutions, and also institutions as in its terminology has been used and somehow abused many times. There are many different ideas of institutions. Just keep in mind that when tackling the idea of institution, at least in governance, environmental governance research, we're not only thinking about formal institutions, but also informal institutions. And this is what new institutional economics can help us with in terms of, for instance, property rights, or even corruptions could be an institutions in some context. Therefore, it must be addressed and analyzed as an institutions, you know. This also, it could be important if you're interested about using the new institutional economics. The third one is also developed by Elinor Ostrom. It's the Institutional and Development Frameworks, the IAD. It analyzes and tests hypotheses about behavior in different situations at multiple levels of analysis, and basically try to describe how rules, physical and material conditions, and attributes of community affect the structure of action arenas, that are those places where the communities and the group they gather to try to find solution to collective problems, for example, and also the incentives that individuals face and the resulting outcomes. This is a very big framework that has been studied and analyzed and criticized very broadly. So if you're interested about that, it also could be useful. The other one is the community-based natural resource management. I mentioned before, Agraval is one of the main scholar that tackles this issue or this framework. Try to investigate the decentralized, self-regulated, and localized systems that is supposed to address the centralized resource access, use, and management. Basically, here we have a situation where very often we witness cases of, for instance, private natural resource reserves or national parks, and how this this sort of struggles between decentralized efficiencies sort of can goes against centralized power, and also to address this sort of throughout those lenses, you know, centralization of power and also resources and also financial resources, so human and financial resources, versus what is really happening in a decentralized arena in the rural areas, or where those resources are located. The last one is the governance analytical framework that describes governance processes. So this is a very like linear framework, which I think it would be also of use. I have personally applied this framework multiple times, and it is based on 5 analytical tools: problems, actors, social norms, processes, and nodal points. So, and the governance analytical framework is the one that I will be proposing to you for today's exercise. I will just describe it a bit better later on. But first of all, I would like to ask if there are any questions so far, again, on this. Let's see, what time is it? Yeah. Okay. So I
have a question before we continue. What's a nodal point?
Yes, I will describe it later. Yeah, I will basically present later. We will see together the graph, and I will explain what are social norms, what are processes, and also nodal points, and of course problems and actors. So I will basically dissect all 5 analytical tools for you. And yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So, to resume a bit about this idea of theories and theoretical frameworks, we got like 3 addressing, you know, governance in environmental research. We got like political ecology at the center, or either the umbrella spectrum. Then we have development theories and perception and representation theories on a strand. So with this basis, we can sort of like play around with different frameworks, depending on what we choose, and also how do we justify why we use what we use in different contexts, of course, in different systems. So, and if we try to sort of like also merge, we can also merge those frameworks together, also improve them, and also maybe take some elements of each, and then try to derive some sort of like also new knowledge or new tools for like the theoretical approaches in governance and environmental research. Please keep in mind that there are many more frameworks, that many more theories that can be used in environmental research exist. Nevertheless, just to give you an idea and hint, this could be also just useful for you, that I try to give you a synthesis of what I would suggest you to look at when thinking about doing research in environmental governance. Here are some of the useful literature that you will see some of these slides sometimes with some literatures. I also pretty much sure that I will be able to share with you this this presentation, so you have the literature if you're interested. But Or this list basically backs up what I've been presenting so far. Now, so this as well, and yeah, I would like to, let me see, to share with you an explicit case about the Philippines in 2015. This is a short video lasting less than 10 minutes, which I would probably send it to you. I would just stop sharing for 1 second. I will send it to you on the chat. It's a link, it's a YouTube link. And then here you can basically access the video, and if you are okay with that, we are back in 10 minutes, so you can just watch it yourself. And then please, if you have any questions or remarks or comments, let me know, and then we continue with the governance analytical framework after that. I hope it's okay for you. Let me know otherwise. And yes, good. Thank you, Hannah. And Rosa and Lina. Okay, now, yeah, enjoy the video. It's a very interesting case and a very interesting story. And let me know what you think. Yeah, see you in 10 minutes then. Thank you. And share my screen. See, we are here. So next would be the governance analytical framework. So this was initially elaborated by AFTI. You will find it in the literature, and was done for work for the United Nations. The idea of this framework is to try to describe or find a way, a method to describe governance. There are some criteria. First of all, it should be realistic and non-normative. When you think about non-normative, think about things that are not socially constructed. So it helps describing the facts as they are and not as they ought to be, according to predefined ideas or assets. This should make it possible to describe a problem, for example, implying without implying a ready-made solutions. And this applies very well also to this idea of traditional ecological knowledge. We've seen many times where organizations falls from the sky into the rural context, try to give a direction for a project on sustainability, on environmental project, etc., without any inputs from the locals. And so that's why this criteria it's quite important. You might think as a pair of binoculars. If you have this binoculars, it's just this instrument that amplifies or magnifies what you're looking at, sharpening the view on and also letting you or permitting you to see details that you are not able to see or perceive before. But at the same time, it does not prescribe any normative orientation, meaning any socially constructed idea. That's why the first criteria, I would say, is one of the most important to keep in mind while applying the methods of the GAF. Interdisciplinary means that we think of governance as a bridge concept. So different knowledges and disciplines are included. And this is also relevant because it breaks away from the narrow approaches of, for example, political science or economics, but it sort of turns the governance itself into a concept that bridges like sociology, anthropology, law, economic geography, and many others, psychology, and many other disciplines. That's why this interdisciplinarity is also very relevant. Then it's reflexive, meaning that it involves a systematic reflections. And this is very curious and very important as well as from a researcher's standpoint, because you need to also think about the influences that you are having on this research process and also the information that you are producing. This basically means that researchers, or we, as when we apply the GAF, for example, we are never completely neutral. Yeah. In consequences, we also have to consider ourselves as also part of it, or part of this research, even parts of actors or stakeholders. When we define problems, or we select tools to observe and also interpret the data and also the interactions with the other actors, observing these governance processes, we have to be to integrate our perspective into the analysis, and this is quite an interesting criteria from my perspective, for example. Then last criteria, it has to be generalizable, comparative, and operationals. So we need to sort of look into a society is used to refer to a group of people who are engaged in long-term relations and share space and some cultural aspects. This is important when thinking about making it possible to compare governance processes taking places in a given situation of society with those going on in other spaces or even in other times. So this is interesting because means that the GAF needs to be also operational, meaning that is should be suitable for analyzing concrete empirical situations. And that makes it also very interesting, the application of these methods. These methods is composed by five elements or 5 tools. The first one is problem, that relates to this plurality of problems we can generalize and are very often considered as social constructions by a number of scholars as well, or at least the analysis and the plurality of problem itself. The values that very much we address in problems are also related to the threats, or the direct or indirect threats, and also to the socio-economic and political context. I forgot to add political there. Social norms, this is basically the rules of the game. So the social norms are like different rules that determine how the rules of the games are established, basically. And this implies different sort of like structure, could be like hierarchical, for example, vertical, horizontal. There are many ways to identify social norms. The actors, so these are like the main actors, the main characters we are addressing. We're talking about society, and then the assessment of their influence, for example, and the categorization of the interactions between actors. Here where it comes also the idea of power relations, where it's really relevant. Nodal points are those physical virtual spaces where people try to address problems and process like how to deal with them, and where decisions also are taken and agreements are concluded and social norms are also created. This, we have a broad spectrum of influence and interactions, including issues of gender, for example, age, etc., etc. And the process is these interactions in nodal points over time. So it's this idea of how sustainability over time can work of these governance processes. We're going now to dissect each of them. So, and I would also give you a specific example Please keep in mind that in the exercise that I would ask you to do after this is to recreate or to create a story following these components. Yeah. I would also later send you a link, direct link on this, the GAF, so you can also follow while doing the exercise. But I want to ask if there are any questions before I continue. Okay, let's see problems then. What are the problems? We have an example of peasant families in rural Colombia. Think about an ideal situation or an imaginary situation with peasant families, or better call them campesinos, in rural Colombia, in a very remote area. There are contextual factors behind the social problems, which is usually referred as hard facts. So what are the hard facts? For example, land erosion on a mountain slope. This is undeniable problem, actual hard fact, very hard fact. So this is the first standing point in terms of analyzing the problems. So while dissecting the problems, we also need to look at the impact of the problems. So the social problem. So how the social problem relates to the hard facts? Maybe not, maybe yes. So marginalized peasant families, for example, are forced to cultivate in sloping lands in unsustainable conditions, resulting in diminishing productivity. This, for example, is pretty much linked to the artifacts, and that's why it is important also to sort of dig down a bit more onto problems, and then what are the causes of the problem? So the nature of the problem. In this case, for example, unequal property structure, the issue being access to land, marginalizations, or structural marginalization. There are many different cases. I'm just giving you a very general examples that doesn't necessarily apply to reality. But if you see the application of GAF, many times you see when addressing the problems, you dissect into these four elements. So hard facts, problem and impact, nature of the problem, and then finally, what is the response of the community? So what are a system of formal and informal laws that exist that sort of try to addressing this topic, this problem? For example, there is in this community of peasant families, there is a self-institutionalized, or there are self-institutionalized groups, syndicates, association. There is a national law, a regional law on property rights, for example. Those are the instruments, either formal or informal, that are used to respond to the problem, that can be used to respond to a problem. And so when you're analyzing the problems, please also keep in mind what are the counter, what can be addressing, what can be solving the problem somehow, or what does already exist. Let's put it this way, so to say. Next one is social norms. Are there any issue or topic or comments on problems? Clarification? Otherwise, I assume everything is clear. All right. Social norms, they help us to guide the behavior of the community members. So, and those are like sort of fostering collective action. So when you have social norms, it's because you are ready to act collectively. So norms are also based on values and beliefs. People have a sense of what is wrong and people have a sense of what is right. And actions are what is ought to be adequate and what is not to be adequate, for example. So this is right, this is not right. And exist two different ideas of sanctions as well related to social norms. One is positive sanctions, so that reinforce this behavior and these beliefs, and some are negative sanctions that constrain this behavior and this on values and beliefs, for example. Example. peasant families want to implement innovation to improve soil fertility. They sign a community agreement not to sell or rent the lands to other actors or to external actors. So peasant families that implement innovations get a sort of certification for sustainable production that is destined to local market, and they give a fine to those who do not comply with the agreement. So as a sanction, yeah. So basically, to resume it a bit better, social norms is what it is a stake, basically beyond the immediate problems, and they include elements of prescriptions. What is good, what is not good, what should be done, what shouldn't be done, and of course sanction, as I said. They are related directly to the social institutions, for example, and they also, when they occur, they become very often institutionalized, meaning that they are internalized by individuals and help to form an institution. So social norms help to form or to create institutions. The arrows that you see in the graphs in figure 1, that is the scalar analysis of norms proposed by the GAF, express the idea that whenever a norm is transmitted, there is a reaction and a return of information to a transmission mechanism, or what you would call also as feedback. Any questions on social norms?
Does this include like the cultural background, like especially when you're dealing with indigenous communities, that it's especially like it's very hard to deal with indigenous communities because most of them are in, I don't know, in other parts of the world, but in Latin America at least, they are like isolated and they don't trust governments, they don't trust like foreigners, let's say. So it's really hard to deal with them, and most of them are attached to their cultural values. And
Sure.
so does this, like the social norms, does this include the cultural aspects of
yeah, very much so. Yeah, very much. For example, those communities who are like decentralized and in remote areas, as you said, that they might create their own groups, their own unions, for example, associations, their own bodies to sort of represent themselves. And this is coming from social norms. What is guiding this behavior, what actions they think based on their values and beliefs are okay or not. And as a researcher, you need to really get into that in terms of like understand and trying to describe. Most of the times what we're trying to do is to describe also what are these prescriptions, from the communities, especially rural communities and those who are most marginalized somehow. Yeah.
What I wanted to ask was, like, does this framework take into account, I think you kind of just mentioned it here, but does this framework take into account sort of what the communities are asking for, rather than coming in and saying, and you need to do this, you need to organize yourselves in this way?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, in my experience, when I did my PhD and I've used the GAF, for example, I spent 4 to 6 months in the community in a very rural areas, completely isolated. And we created a together with the community. So I was guiding the accesses, but they were giving all the contents about community-based model, for example, that it was coming out from this exercise of the GAF. So for example, we would sit together and have a workshop on social norms, yeah? And I would be just listening, to be honest, and gathering information and trying to share them with them, and trying to also face those actual prescriptions to what, for example, the law says, or what, within the context they are embedded with. So in that sense, yes, it's mostly about their voices, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you want to focus more, or put a lens on that, you should definitely then really look also on perception and representation studies. In that sense, really helps you give in terms of theory, yeah, to use a theory that can raise, can center the voices of the communities, of the actors involved. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
Good.
Thank
you. No problem.
I have another question about what like that follows. What happens, for example, like if you work with communities and they want something that will not actually benefit them in the long term, like for example, I remember that when I was working in the private sector in this company, we used to work a lot with communities, and sometimes they would, I don't know, like they would, maybe their perceptions are different, but we went to communities where there's no water, like they don't have water. But when we would ask them what they wanted, they would say, oh, we want for you to build us a school, for example. And it's like, oh yes, that's what they want, and of course we respect that, but like you're also thinking about their benefit, and about how they can improve their lives. And if you don't have water, for example, and if they don't even have the basic thing like water, like how do you tackle this? Because sometimes what they want is not necessarily what is the best for them.
I agree completely. I completely agree. I think it really depends who are you addressing, where are these needs coming from. So why do they need it? Why do they want a school, for example? What is the reason behind? What is the maybe cultural or prescriptions behind that? What is the values of the communities that makes them that deliberate that they would choose schools over water, for example? I think in the research you really need to sit and be patient about and analyzing the history, the background, the cultural beliefs, the religion, everything that can sort of like trigger a decision that can be wrong. And then while you analyzing, you as a researcher, you don't usually find solutions to actual problem, like in a very immediate terms. Yeah, you try to, especially in rural contexts where very much often research is very scarce, you try to describe a situation and present a situation as it is. So I think Dr. Bonatti, Michelle, can also add on this. I see your hand.
Yeah, no, you were talking. I don't want to interrupt, but I think it's very interesting because in the case that we are working, I think this is quite common when you go to study a community, that they demand things or what are important for them. It's sometimes very different what you think it is. So that's why it's interesting hear them very well and let them guide the process in a much more deliberative way than a normative way. And I think this sometimes those shocks of views of what has to be done, it can be very quite common. And I think that's the big force after identifying is how to integrate these different perspectives. And that's what Luca also work a lot, and I work a lot on the study cases, trying to integrate how those different views of reality can be integrated. If it's possible to do a school, and then in the school there will be a water collector, for example, or rainwater collector. This is a case of Tanzania study, for example, that we had, that clearly from the team of the agronomists, the community need water, but they still have school issues. So the water collection was placed on the school, and they also did an educational center added to the small school that they have. So I think that that's when the development really gained meaning of having different perspectives. So it's not only, okay, they want a school, we forget about water, we do the school, but it's how to integrate those perspectives and make that people have power to decide, but that also the voice of policymakers, researchers, and other stakeholders are there. So I think this is very challenging and very, very challenging thing to do, but I think this is the goal, more or less, when you try to understand the frames with, for example, GAF, as Luca is presenting.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Maria, I think, did you answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Good.
I have another question.
Yes.
Yeah, with these social norms, it is often the case that people, like we as people, tend to say like this should be done in this way, like as a norm. But in reality, what we do is another thing, and I think that happens a lot with working communities. That there is like an established true, and then another norm that is exercised in the practice. So how can you deal with this in this framework?
I couldn't hear very well. Could you, because of I think the connection was, I couldn't hear very well your question, your exact question. Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah, there is sometimes in like in social life that we have like some rules that that are established. But yeah, and everyone says like this is a rule.
Yeah.
But when you look at it in practice, people do the opposite thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So how can you deal with this? Because it's also like also in the local level, but very much in the national level. For example, the government says, "I'm doing this," and it does something else. And I think it happens in all the levels.
Yes.
So how can you deal with that in this component?
Well, very good question. Thank you. I think in using the GAF, for example, what would you do with that? You would describe both sides. So you would describe what is prescribed or what is ought to be the norm, the social norm, and what the reality actually is. So you would basically face together or mirror together the two facets, the two faces. So in that sense, you can describe, and then once you have the two faces, then you can really come to conclusion that, for example, policies are not the most useful solutions for these areas because they are not implemented, yeah, or policies that refer to these social norms, yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. This is what I would suggest, to be honest. Okay, any more questions about the social norms, or we jump into...
I have one question, because I had in the beginning a bit, I found it a bit contradicting, the criterion to be kind of realistic and non-normative, to kind of related to social norms. But
yeah,
maybe now I understand that it's maybe like really just try to describing as it is, is kind of realistic. Is it that what it means to applicate this criterion?
Yes, it means that you go to a place, you try to describe it or analyze a situation, try to investigate a situation without having in your head a self-made or ready-made solution. Yeah, in that sense, is not normative, and it's realistic. But yeah.
All right, thanks.
No problem. Okay, let's jump into actors. Otherwise, we won't have much time later. Just checking the times. Okay, actors. So we try to identify and describe the actors. So there are many ways to do so. Stakeholders, mapping stakeholders, and there are many methodologies you can use and participatory approaches you can apply to find actors and to, for example, peasant families are our sample. Then we have civil societies that is represented by, in our case, in this peasant family in Colombia, NGOs, national and local media, university, the private sector, and the public sector. That there are different actors, but I think the idea is that when you are trying to really describe the actors, you should really get into all diversity, or as much diversity as possible in that sense. And then you try to assess the influence of actors. I have taken this example of Bourdieu, is a very famous sociologist. So from sociology, there are different ideas of capitals that I will explain now. So by giving you some complete example. For example, in this area is home to Simón Bolívar, that was a mythological character, a military and a leader who basically liberated Colombia many centuries ago, and this is a symbolic capital that is like honor, recognition of an actors that an actress enjoys, and also the abstract representation of the environment can be also the abstract representation of the environment can be a symbolic capital. Yeah, for example, I don't know, the rainforest, or because of this symbology as well. So the symbolic capital, it's what Bourdieu would tell us when dealing with actors and the influence to really look at also this first of all this element. Then on whether or not one multinational company, for example, works in the study area. In our specific case, this would be an economic capital, because is revenues and properties and this is an important also actors' influence, or element for actors' influence. Then in our case, the most groups are embedded in the same culture, so they share some ideas, traditions, maybe even religion. And then social capital is what Bourdieu call as, you know, the social network and an actor can mobilize, and also the connections and interaction, and sharing also this sense of unity and identity. This is what social capital is about, according to Bourdieu. And then finally, so a few groups are familiar with sustainable practices. In our case, this what we would call cultural capital is the knowledge to be drawn on. And based on this idea of actors' influence, then we try to categorize the interactions between actors. And again, following our examples, we have a situation where there is a voter-politicians relations that exist very much in the case study area. And this, for example, going back to theories, if we use the new institutional economics and the elements of the description of institutions and corruptions, then we really can describe and assess this, or is one way to assess also the way we deal with these situations within the of interactions between actors. It's just a way to do it. There are many ways also to describe and to address actors. My suggestion to you is mostly to open up the spectrum as much as you can in any given situation that you are trying to describe, whether it's natural resource access or use or management or environmental risks, etc. You try to engage with diverse groups of the civil society, the actors in general. I think this is important, and also the combinations between the interaction of the actors is also very important, and defines very much also the the different type of relationship that can occur in this case, like, for example, as we can see many times, is this clientelism or commerce or family, or as in this case, voter politicians relations. This could be many different cases and interactions, and this is all based on the observation you do in the field mostly. And this is why also to address actors is also important to implement research that is really into the field and is really like present and grounded to the actual reality of the situations. Again, as I said, there are many ways and tools to represent the analysis of actors and their interactions. And for example, you might have heard of this actors mapping is one of the had the most use, I would say, and this could also be done with the communities you are doing research with, etc., or your group of study, for example, research. Any questions on actors? Okay, I assume everything is clear. So, jumping to nodal points. Nodal points are those, negotiation tables of local communities where they gather. So there are spaces, the actual space, physical spaces or virtual spaces where we address problems and where decisions are taken and agreements are concluded and also norms are created. This is what the nodal points, as you see, is the central point or the meeting point of norms, stakes, or the problems, stake, actors, and the processes itself, as you can see from figure 2. This is important because we basically what the GAF does with the nodal points is try to distinguish also the formal and informal nodal points. So they are both formal and informal, and they all form the sort of like fabric of decision making spaces and decision making processes. So the identification and characterization of different nodal points and the relationship, as well as their effects on the problem that is observed, for example, provides the basis for the analysis of these existing conditions, for example, or whether they are favorable or unfavorable to process of changes. So this, I think, may relate to the questions by Maria before, I think, which was about what if we go there and then and we want to suggest something and they want something else, or we think something is important and they have a different opinion. I think this analysis of nodal points, which, by the way, in other frameworks, like for example, Ostrom frameworks, they're called action arena or dialogue spaces. There are many names for that, but in the GAF calls it like nodal points, is where all actors or norms, processes, and stakes are gathered in the same physical or virtual space. So this is what nodal points are. Questions or doubts or something to clarify? In our case, local community, for example, created an assembly that addresses the unsustainability of land cultivation that was established 5 years ago. This is just an example to say, okay, there is a space, there is a nodal point that exists, and and this is a good starting point in terms of like describing, if I can reach to this level of the governance process, I'm quite on the way already to be able to better and more analytically and scientifically also describe and investigate this this specific governance process, for example.
Would you say that like if there's a particular problem and it doesn't really have like this is the stage where you say, okay, if you find nodal points, then you can be like, all right, this is something that like actually is like governance is taking place. And if you like kind of fail to find real like spaces where the problems are like debated, would you then just say like these are issues that people think of, but like they're not really like being governed, so to speak?
Yeah.
So far, yeah, okay.
And exactly, and could be either formal spaces or also informal spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Like I don't know, there are cases of like neighborhood gathering or assembly or something that is not institutionalized, but as nevertheless as a place of dialogues where we can address a specific issue that we are looking at.
Yeah, and it's generally like, would you agree that it's like a good sign?
Yeah.
And like you kind of, yeah, it's like it's when you find a nodal point, then you're like, okay, like we actually see that there's some substance to analyze,
Yeah, and if not, you just try to describe the fact that a nodal point is missing, for example, and that would help to in the process of a better process of governance, and finally to achieve a good governance of natural resources in this case, or
Okay, thanks.
Does there a method exist to maybe find more informal or maybe hidden nodal points? Kind of which ones that are maybe not that obvious than like a community assembly?
Yeah, that's when you can use many methods in the field. I'll give you an example. I go to the field. I want to find out whether or not the informal nodal points exist. What I would instinctively do is to create maybe a survey or like a semi-structured interview, and I would start going around with the communities. And one of the questions, or maybe all questions, will be related to the fact that I am curious to know whether there is a space that is not formally created where the specific issue that I'm dealing with in my research is addressed. Yeah. That I would do it with surveys or interview or semi-structured interview, but yeah.
All right. Sounds interesting. Thanks.
No problem. Okay, then I think it's time to jump into processes, which is the last bit of the GAF. They can be, so basically the processes, they introduce the historical dimension, dimension of the methodology. This is important because it gives you the idea of the sustainability of time in time of this of potential governance process. For the analysis itself, usually the processes are sequenced into situation or moments which can be compared in time to understand the direction in which they sort of evolved. So there is a pattern of evolutions, as you can see, as well as to identify also factors that are favorable or unfavorable to potential changes or improvements. So they can be, so in this sense, the problem is delimited by the line that circles the processes. For example, peasant families, A, it's the letter A, civil society is B, private sector is C, and public sector is D. In our case, those were the main actors, and then they interacted over time, 0, 1, time 1, time 2, in, I don't know, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years. And the idea of this interaction is based on this sort of like nodal points, yeah? So these places like community assemblies, and they meet like 3 times over a 1-year period, addressing the specific issues that we're trying to investigate, yeah? In this case, was the idea of the unsustainable use of the mountain slopes, yeah? So this gives you a perspective and about the whole, actually the whole process of the governance process. To be fair, to get to this stage, it's very hard, I would say, in terms of like gathering enough data, and also the practice in real life to get to this stage where you can actually visualize and also describe end times and end processes of governance about the specific issues. It's very hard to find what has been, in my case, it's been really hard to sort of get to this point of processes. Very often I would just find enough data and gather data to sort of like describe what is the nodal points. So there will always be a missing part, that is the governance process. This, what I'm showing to you, and the example I'm giving to you, is like the ideal situation where you can actually get to the process and close this sort of like circle of the governance, of the GAF, of the governance analytical framework. So, Eleonora.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask, you said this is an example. So my question is, can we also use this framework at other level and not just local level?
Yeah. Yes.
So we could directly tackle the problem of unequal land property rights and distribution, directly that one.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the fact that this is a non-normative framework gives you the liberty somehow to also deconstruct the framework itself, meaning that there are many cases where, for example, in my research, on some specific research that I've used the GAF, I couldn't use the 5 tools, yeah? I could just use 1 or 2 or 3, and then I would only need to justify the reason why I couldn't get to the other point, or using the other elements, yeah? So in this case, yes, you can deconstruct the GAF, and you can also definitely get to an analysis that doesn't give you a full perspective of this process.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any additional questions? Okay. I don't know if they are like just good. I think with time we are good. I would just stop sharing 1 second the screen, and I'm back here. So I will share with you, if you give me a second, the actual small pamphlet of the GAF, because you might use this. I'll send the link to you. Hold on a second. I think it should be here. Oh no, wait, I just. Okay, let me know if you can access this. It's it's a link to ResearchGate, but then you can download the Governance Analytica Framework by AFTI, and also, or you can read it online directly, yeah? this would be useful for you to tackle the exercise. Before that, and I will share again my screen. Sorry for this confusion. It's the first time I'm doing this lecture online. Usually it's live. Share screen. Okay, we're back. And we go to the, so there's also a link on useful literature. I will share this presentation with you. Yeah, Michelle, let me know if I should send it directly in the chat. I could also do that, or we can send an email later, or if there's a platform at Humboldt where we can.
The lecture? You mean the lecture or
yeah.
the?
Yeah, the lecture.
Yeah. I think it's too big and you cannot send by link. You need to use WeTransfer.
Yeah, or I can. Yeah, I can transform into a PDF, or we can talk later. Yeah, it's okay.
Yes. If it's not the video, yeah, then you just transform in PDF, and then we will upload and have as the other. Also, this is general information for everybody. We have all the lectures we have on Moodle with all the material and the presentation and the link to the video. So it will be the same for this lecture.
Yeah. And this slide on useful literature really is related to what we have, some of the tools that we have addressed. And I think just to give you, if you're interested, maybe to dig down more on social norms, maybe you might be interested in meta norms, constitutive norms, and there are many different ideas and some literatures that could be useful to you, as well as actors as well. And yeah, so I leave it there. Then eventually when you want to do research, there's plenty of articles and books that you can look at. That is a group activity. I think, I don't know, usually how much time do you take for a group activity? When it's a physical lecture, I usually give 45 minutes. Where you can choose one case or you can choose one story that you can relate to this GAF. Also, it doesn't have to be a real story necessarily, but of course, if you have like good examples from your work or for their experience, also would be nice to see whether or not you could address or use the GAF somehow. And the idea is to analyze the governance processes of this story, and you create a very short narrative describing of each of the five the GAF components, and then there will be a little space to present and tell the story. I hope it is okay with you. I don't know if virtually you could do this also collectively, also in little groups is also fine to me. I don't know if that's possible with you, but otherwise you could do it by yourself, and then you just give us a short presentation about the elements, like problems, actors, social norms, nodal points, and processes of a specific context. To have some ideas, you could address the idea of like indigenous land use and management, protected areas versus agricultural use, sharing water resources, sources, housing policies in city as well, and others. For example, once last year, we also suggested some a European Union policy, for example, and how that could apply in the context of a governance process, which was interesting. But nevertheless, let me know if you have any questions about these group activities. And I will be online anyway. I think the material, you have the material, so you have the link of the GAF if you want to just follow it, and then describe your stories, and then a little time for a small presentation, at least to think about. Use this also as an idea, maybe if you're interested about the topic for your master thesis, or maybe a topic that you like, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just for you to to understand how to use one of the many framework that you could use to describe or to tackle environmental governance and research. Yeah.
Would it be possible for you guys to create some breakout rooms so that we could do group work?
Yeah, very good questions. I'm not sure I could do it from here, or maybe yes.
I don't know if just only the host can do this.
Yeah, that would be Stefan, I guess.
Hold on, I will send a message.
Sure.
Wait, I think I'm co-host. Maybe I can do this. Wait. Luca, you are also co-host. I'm also co-host.
I didn't know. But I guess I could use the.
Okay. How we do, because I'm not on my computer.
Let me check 1 second. Sorry, guys. Hold on, and we'll find out.
We can also take like a break for 5 or 10 minutes, and then like start it. You can have some time to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to have a break. Good. Yeah, also.
For like attention as well.
Yeah, good idea. Okay, so let's do a break. Maybe we can stop to record then.
Yeah.